and welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're really diving into a hot topic, one that's been making headlines and causing a lot of debate, to a living wage. And you, our amazing listeners, have sent us a ton of really interesting sources on this. Academic papers, policy briefs, heck, even excerpts from a dissertation. Someone's been doing the research, huh?
It's fantastic. I love to see this level of engagement. And it's so smart that you're clearly looking at this from all sides, which is key, right?
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about whether a living wage is a good or bad thing at face value, but really understanding all of those potential consequences, those ripples that spread out, both the intentional ones and the ones we might not expect.
Okay, so let's lay it all out for our listeners, map out this deep dive. Today, we're tackling the arguments both for and against requiring a living wage right here in the U.S. Get ready, because we'll be covering its potential impact on, well, pretty much everything. Poverty, inflation. Heck, we've even got democracy itself on the docket.
Oh, and we can't forget the global view. You've even included some really cool research on how things have played out with Australia's living wage system, which, by the way, they've had in place for quite a while. We're also going to dissect those different methods used to actually calculate what even is a living wage, because that detail often gets lost in the heat of the debate.
Yeah, it's more complicated than just picking a number, right? Okay, so let's unpack this a little. One of the big arguments you sent us centers around this idea that, well, if you're working full-time, you should be able to actually afford a decent standard of living. Makes sense on the surface, right? A lot of these sources are really highlighting that growing gap between our current minimum wage and what it actually costs to live, especially with inflation going a bit haywire these days.
You're spot on. In fact, there's a 2024 report you sent in that lays out a pretty shocking statistic. Since 2009, the cost of living has skyrocketed, like 36.41% higher, while that federal minimum wage has stubbornly stayed put at $7.25 an hour. Those numbers, they tell a story, don't they?
Whoa, that's a huge difference. No wonder people are feeling the squeeze. You've also included some fascinating research from the Global Living Wage Coalition. They're advocating for wages that go beyond just keeping your head above water, you know? I'm talking healthcare, education, all those essentials that add up to a good quality of life.
It's a much more holistic approach. They're acknowledging that true well-being isn't just about scraping by, right? What's really interesting is that they use a ton of local data to figure out what a living wage should be in different areas. They factor in things like housing costs, transportation, all those essential needs that, as you can imagine, are wildly different from city to city, even state to state.
Yeah, that local focus makes a ton of sense. The cost of living in, say, New York City versus, I don't know, rural Arkansas. Those are two different worlds. It's not one size fits all, right? It's wild, though. You even sent over this article that connects a living wage to, get this, a stronger democracy. That's a new one for me.
It's a fascinating take, right? Their argument is that by giving workers greater financial independence, you're essentially empowering them to be more active and engaged citizens. They're less likely to feel backed into a corner, forced to support populist leaders just to get by. It's this idea that a living wage could lead to a more informed and involved group of voters, which is like Democracy 101.
That is seriously interesting. It really makes you flip the script and see the bigger picture, those potential societal benefits that go beyond just helping individuals, right? But of course, you've also included research that isn't afraid to point out the potential downsides. And there are some big concerns about those negative ripple effects, especially when it comes to the economy.
Absolutely. And this is where things get really intricate, where looking at both sides of the coin is crucial. One of the biggest anxieties you see popping up is this fear that a living wage will just supercharge inflation. Think about it. Businesses hit with those increased labor costs, they might have to jack up prices, and then you get caught in this crazy wage price spiral that can be incredibly hard to control.
Yeah.
You even included a historical analysis of what the UK went through back in the 1970s, which, let me tell you, sounds like a cautionary tale if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, that period in the UK was a wild ride, economically speaking. I vaguely remember reading about how those rapid wage increases, plus other factors like those huge supply chain issues they had back then, all combined into this perfect storm of runaway inflation that took them ages to get under control. Makes you wonder if those historical parallels could repeat themselves, you know?
Exactly. And it's not just prices we need to consider. Some of the sources you sent are raising red flags about potential job losses, especially in those industries where profit margins are already super thin. You sent over a study from the Cato Institute that actually modeled what a $15 minimum wage would look like, and their projection, a loss of 1.4 million jobs. A scary number that really makes us stop and think about those unintended consequences.
It makes you pause, right? You might be lifting some people out of poverty, but what if it comes at the cost of others losing their jobs altogether? And then there's that whole debate about whether a national living wage is even the right move, considering how drastically the cost of living can change depending on where you are in the U.S.
You've hit on such a crucial point. A one-size-fits-all approach, maybe not the best game plan. One article you included really drove this home by highlighting the huge difference in living costs between, say, Arkansas, where a living wage might be closer to like $10 or $11 an hour, and New York City, where it's estimated to be more like $15 or $16 an hour. Yeah. That's a massive gap. It suggests that a single federal mandate could have radically different and potentially unforeseen consequences depending on location, even making those regional economic disparities worse.
It seems like walking that tightrope, finding the balance, is key. We need to be mindful of the impact on workers, for sure, but also on those businesses, especially the small businesses that are often seen as like the heart of the American economy. You included some perspectives arguing that a living wage could actually end up hurting the very people it's supposed to help by stifling those who are trying to start their own businesses. It's a tough pill to swallow.
It really is. And that particular article hones in on the difficulties small businesses would face, especially those in sectors where labor costs are a major chunk of their expenses. Imagine you're a small business owner, maybe in rural Mississippi, and suddenly your labor costs jump significantly. You're left with some really tough choices. Hike up your prices, cut back on your staff, or worst case scenario, close up shop. That could mean fewer jobs, fewer opportunities, especially for those who are just starting out.
So if a federal living wage isn't the magic bullet, what are some of the other options on the table? What are people proposing in the research you've gathered? There's got to be a middle ground somewhere, right?
Oh, there are definitely other paths being explored. Several of these sources point to policies like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which people usually call the EITC, as a more focused way to address poverty.
So instead of forcing businesses to pay everyone more, which could be a real burden, especially for smaller companies, this EITC thing, it's about getting that money directly to those lower wage workers, right? But how does that actually work?
It's actually pretty straightforward. Basically, the EITC gives tax breaks to people who are earning below a certain income level. So they get to keep more of the money they worked for, which effectively boosts their income without companies having to shoulder the whole burden of those higher wage mandates.
I see. So it's kind of like a sneaky income boost. You've also got some research in here that dives into some even more, shall we say, radical ideas, like completely cutting taxes for people earning below a certain income. That almost seems too good to be true, doesn't it?
It definitely gets your attention, right? Those who support this approach, they argue that it ultimately achieves the same goal as a living wage, which is, of course, putting more money in the pockets of those lower income earners. But they believe it sidesteps those potential downsides of a government-mandated wage floor.
Okay, so instead of forcing companies to pay more, you're letting them keep more of their profits, but then using taxes to, like, redistribute some of that wealth. It's like a roundabout way of getting to the same place.
Exactly. It's all about exploring those different mechanisms to reach that same objective, making sure everyone can afford to live a decent life. And, naturally, those who favor this way of doing things argue that it could actually be a shot in the arm for economic growth. Their logic is that if you put more money directly into the hands of consumers, especially those who are most likely to spend it, you're going to boost demand and create this ripple effect that benefits the whole economy.
Interesting. It's a direct counterpoint to that classic argument that raising wages will just kill economic growth, right? But we've been spending a lot of time in the weeds of economics here. Your research also delves into the moral side of this living wage debate, which, let's be honest, is where things get really interesting. It's not just about dollars and cents. It's about our values as a society, how we treat each other.
You're absolutely right. A lot of the sources you sent go beyond just the financial aspect to explore those moral arguments, and they bring up some big questions about what we, as a society, consider acceptable.
Yeah, like what are our obligations to one another, right? One of the things you included, an academic paper on the philosophy behind the living wage, it boils the whole thing down to basic human dignity.
It's a powerful argument. Their point is that in a truly just society, it's just not right to allow people to work their tails off full-time and still not be able to afford the basics. It calls into question our social contract, that unwritten agreement we have as citizens.
Right, like, hey, we're all in this together, and the system shouldn't be set up to keep people trapped in poverty no matter how hard they work. But it goes even deeper than that. You even found something connecting the whole living wage debate to, get this, Immanuel Kant, that philosophical heavyweight.
Now that's what I call a deep dive. This source takes Kant's categorical imperative, which, for those who need a refresher, is all about universalizability. Can you rationally will that everyone should act this way? And applies it to wages.
So if I'm following you, the argument is that paying someone a wage that doesn't even allow them to cover their basic needs, to live with some dignity, that's a form of exploitation. You're using them as a means to an end, not treating them as valuable human beings.
Exactly. And it's not just Kant. You also included some research that looks at this through the lens of John Rawls' theory of justice. Rawls was all about fairness and equality, and his ideas have been hugely influential.
Right. His big thought experiment was that whole veil of ignorance thing. Imagine having to design a society from scratch, but you have no idea where you'll end up, rich, poor, healthy, disabled, you name it. Would you feel good about creating a system where people could work full time and still be stuck in poverty? Or would you build in some safety nets?
And that's the heart of it. If we're being honest with ourselves, if we step behind that veil, a lot of us would say that a living wage isn't just a good idea, it's a moral obligation.
Yeah.
It's about guaranteeing a basic level of well-being for everyone, no matter what circumstances they're born into.
Man, these ethical arguments really add another dimension to the conversation. It's not just about crunching numbers and economic models, it's about wrestling with our own moral compass, both individually and as a society.
And those moral, philosophical arguments, they hit even harder when you factor in the real human impact of those low wages. You included some research that really drives this home, firsthand accounts from people who are out there right now living on minimum wage.
It's one thing to talk about statistics and theories, but it's a whole different ballgame to hear about the day-to-day realities, the tough choices people have to make. Those stories are incredibly powerful.
They really paint a picture of just how much people struggle to make ends meet on such low wages. We're talking about the stress of making rent, putting food on the table, dealing with unexpected medical bills. It's a constant battle just to stay afloat.
One of the sources that really got to me was this collection of interviews with minimum wage workers. It talked about these impossible choices they're often faced with. Groceries or a vital prescription, working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep their heads above water. It's heartbreaking.
It reminds us that this isn't just some abstract policy debate, It's about real people's lives, their dignity, their hopes for the future. These stories challenge us to look beyond the economic arguments, to see the human cost of those low wages.
They make those economic arguments feel way more real, that's for sure. But hold on, you've also got some research here that kind of flips the script on those traditional economic arguments. It suggests that living wage could actually be good for business, good for the economy as a whole.
You're right. It's not all doom and gloom on the economic front. There's a growing body of research out there that indicates a living wage could lead to some really positive outcomes. Higher productivity, lower employee turnover, even better customer service.
When you think about it, it makes sense, right? If people are constantly stressed about money, worried about paying their bills, they're not going to be at their best. But if they feel valued, if they can actually afford to live without that constant pressure, that's got to be reflected in their work.
Exactly. Several of these sources highlight the idea that investing in your employees, and yes, paying them a living wage is an investment, can be a really smart business move. It creates a more motivated, more engaged workforce, which usually translates into a better bottom line. Plus, let's not forget how much it costs to constantly hire and train new people because of high turnover. A living wage can help businesses save money in the long run by keeping those experienced employees around.
So it's not just about doing the right thing. There's a potential win-win here for businesses, too. That's something you don't always hear in this debate.
And it's not just about individual companies. There's even research suggesting that a living wage could actually boost the entire economy by increasing consumer spending, which, as we talked about before, can have those positive ripple effects.
Right. It challenges that old assumption that raising the minimum wage will inevitably tank the economy. Maybe, just maybe, lifting people out of poverty could actually create a stronger, more dynamic economy for everyone. It's a powerful idea.
It really is. What's good for workers can be good for business, good for the economy as a whole. Maybe those goals aren't mutually exclusive after all.
This deep dive has been, well, eye-opening is an understatement. It's such a complex issue, and I think we've done a good job of looking at it from all these different angles, the economics, the ethics, the real-life experiences of those who are most affected by it.
You've done an amazing job of bringing all these different viewpoints together, showing that this isn't just some abstract debate. It's about real people and the kind of society we want to live in.
It's not just about crunching numbers, it's about figuring out what we value and finding solutions that reflect those values.
You've clearly put in the work on this issue.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface, though, right? Like there's so much more to uncover here. We've talked about the big picture stuff, but what about those specific policy proposals, the nitty-gritty of actually putting something like a living wage into practice, especially with the economy always changing?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where things get really real. We can talk about theories and ideas all day, but turning those into action, creating real lasting change, that's the challenge. And you know what? You've actually included some research that goes beyond just the what if and dives into some real-world examples.
Yeah, you're right. Anyone can sit around and theorize, but seeing how this plays out in real life, that's what matters. So what if we learn from those places that have actually taken the leap and implemented a living wage?
Well, you sent over some really insightful case studies looking at cities and states that have tried out different living wage models. And there's a lot to learn from them, both the successes and, let's be real, some of the bumps in the road.
Let's talk about those bumps. What kind of challenges have these places run into? What hasn't worked so well?
One thing that keeps coming up is the importance of careful planning, like really thinking through how you actually implement a living wage. You can't just announce it and hope for the best, right?
Mm.
These case studies show how important it is to have clear ways to make sure businesses are playing by the rules, actually paying that new wage. And, just as important, dealing with those potential downsides we talked about, like what happens if jobs are lost or businesses close.
Right, gotta anticipate those potential problems and have a plan, right?
Yeah.
I imagine flexibility is important too. Like, what works in one city might not work somewhere else.
100%. This isn't a set it and forget it kind of thing. It needs constant evaluation. The cost of living, it's not static, it changes, and so does the economy as a whole. Those real-world examples really show how crucial it is to have ways to adjust the living wage over time so it stays relevant and actually works.
So it's an ongoing process, always adapting and tweaking based on new data and new situations. It's really interesting to see those theoretical debates we were having earlier play out in the real world.
I know, right? And it emphasizes something we talked about before. There's no one-size-fits-all answer here. But by looking at how other places have done it, we can learn a lot about what worked, what doesn't, and how to create solutions that fit different situations.
Feels like there's a big opportunity here for everyone to work together. Policymakers, business owners, community groups, even economists. Imagine everyone coming together, sharing data, sharing what they've learned. We could create a much better system that way, right?
I think so, yeah. This doesn't have to be a battle. It's about finding ways to make things work for everyone, realizing that when workers are doing well, the whole economy benefits.
You know, hearing all this talk about the right solution, the perfect approach, it makes me wonder if we're even asking the right questions. What if instead of this being an either thing, either a national living wage or nothing, what if we tried something a little less rigid, a little more, I don't know, decentralized?
Now there's an idea. What if, instead of one rule for everyone, we gave local communities the power to set their own living wages, ones that actually reflect their own cost of living and economic reality?
Right. Like we said before, the cost of living in, say, rural Mississippi is a world away from Manhattan. So why should they have the same minimum wage? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's a really strong argument for a more localized approach. Give communities the flexibility to decide what's best for them, to try new things, to be more responsive to the needs of their people.
I really like this idea of letting communities tailor their own solutions. It feels more democratic, more in line with like local control, you know?
It's definitely an interesting avenue to explore, thinking outside that traditional box and looking at new ways to achieve economic justice. Sometimes the best solutions come from the ground up, not the top down.
Wow, this whole deep dive has been quite a ride. We've gone from the economics to the ethics, even peeked behind the scenes to see how this is all playing out in the real world. What started as a seemingly simple question, should there be a living wage, has turned into, well, a whole universe of complexities, nuances, even philosophical puzzles.
You've nailed it. That's the essence of a real deep dive, approaching a topic with curiosity, really digging into the research and trying to understand it from every angle.
Well, I definitely couldn't have done it without you, and all your insights on the incredible research our listeners sent in. This has been an amazing learning experience, and I have a feeling this conversation isn't over. There's still so much to think about, to explore, so many different perspectives to consider.
I couldn't agree more. This is a conversation that needs to continue. one that deserves our attention and our best efforts to find solutions.
To all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and, let's face it, complex world of the living wage. We hope you found it as thought-provoking and insightful as we did. And don't forget, you can find links to all the amazing research we talked about in our show notes. And as always, keep those questions coming. Until next time, happy learning, everyone!